The Rakshasa Kingdom. Ma Ji, the son of a merchant, set off to make a living at sea but got caught in a typhoon and drifted to the country of Rakshasa. The people there had incredibly strange appearances, considering beauty as ugly and ugliness as beauty. The uglier their appearance, the higher their social status. Ma Ji later arrived at the sea market and was summoned by the Dragon King to be a groom. He had a son and a daughter with the Dragon Princess, but due to the separation of realms, the Dragon Princess couldn't come to the human world. As a result, Ma Ji and his children depended on each other for survival. Ma Ji, a merchant's son, also known as Long Mei, was handsome with a talented appearance. He had a carefree personality since childhood and enjoyed singing and dancing. He often accompanied the theater troupe, wearing a silk handkerchief on his head and resembling a beautiful girl, earning him the title of Beautiful Man. At the age of 14, he was admitted to the government school and became famous for his excellent writing skills. As his father aged and retired from business, he said to his son, "A few scrolls of books can neither fill your stomach nor clothe you. It's better for you to inherit my business and engage in trade." Following his father's advice, Ma Ji weighed the investment and profit, and began his journey as a merchant, sailing across the seas to conduct business. One day, a hurricane struck at sea, and after drifting for several days and nights, their ship arrived at a city. Everyone in this city was incredibly ugly, but they considered Ma Ji to be a monster. Whenever they saw him, they would scream and run away. Initially, Ma Ji was afraid when he saw their reactions. However, he realized that they were also fearful of him, so he started taking advantage of the situation and bullying them. Whenever he encountered people eating, he would rush over, and they would flee in terror while he enjoyed the remaining food. As time went by, Ma Ji became familiar with the people there and moved to a mountain village. Some villagers had similar appearances to Ma Ji, but they were dressed in tattered clothes like beggars. Ma Ji rested under a tree, and the villagers were afraid to approach him, watching him from a distance. As time passed, they realized that Ma Ji wasn't a man-eating monster, so they cautiously approached him. Ma Ji smiled and spoke to the villagers. Although their languages were different, they could understand each other to a large extent. Ma Ji explained his background, and the villagers were delighted. They spread the news to their neighbors, reassuring them that the visitor was not a monster, and everyone felt relieved. However, the people with ugly appearances still didn't dare to approach Ma Ji. Only those whose facial features resembled Chinese people would get close to him, offering him food and drink. Ma Ji asked the villagers why they were afraid of him. The villagers said, "I once heard my grandfather say that there is a strange country called China, 26,000 miles to the west. We had only heard about it before, but today, seeing it with our own eyes, it is indeed as described." The villagers continued, "In our country, what matters is not knowledge and talent, but appearance. The most beautiful people become high-ranking officials, the next best become local officials, and they live a life of abundance. As for people like us, as soon as we are born, our parents consider us unlucky and we are often abandoned." Ma Ji asked, "What is this country called?" The villager replied, "It is called the Rakshasa country, and its capital is to the north, about 30 miles from here." Ma Ji asked the villager to lead him there, and the villager agreed readily. The next day, at the first call of the rooster, the villager led Ma Ji and they arrived at the capital at daybreak. They saw that the city walls were made of black stones, and the towers were about 10 jang high. The tops were covered with red stones, and when they picked up fragments and ground them, they turned into vermilion. At that moment, the king was leaving the court, and a high-ranking official came out in a horse-drawn carriage. The villager told Ma Ji that he was the prime minister. Ma Ji took a closer look and noticed that the prime minister had 2 protruding ears and a nose with 3 holes. His eyelashes covered his eyes like a curtain. After that, several officials on horseback appeared, and the villagers said, "These are the physicians." They pointed out the various officials of different ranks to Ma Ji, and indeed, each one had a grotesque and strange appearance. However, as their positions decreased, their ugliness lessened. Before long, Ma Ji turned back and started walking. When the people on the street saw him, they shouted and ran away in panic, as if they had seen a monster. The accompanying villager quickly explained to them, and the people stood at a distance to watch. After returning to the village, news spread among the officials of all ranks in the Rakshasa country that a strange person had come to the village. They eagerly wanted to see him firsthand and broaden their horizons. They sent people to the village to invite Maji to visit them. At each house Maji visited, the officials hurriedly closed their doors, and the whole family peeped through the cracks, whispering to each other. They didn't dare to invite him inside. It was already past noon when the accompanying villagers said to Maji, "There is an old man here who served as an envoy in the court, wielding the ceremonial staff. He has been sent by the former king to foreign countries and has seen all kinds of people. Perhaps he won't be afraid of you." Maji asked the villagers to lead the way, and the two came to the old man's residence. Seeing Maji, the old man was not afraid at all, and treated him as a distinguished guest. Maji took a closer look at the old man's appearance. He was about 80 or 90 years old, with protruding eyes, curly and thick beard, like a hedgehog. After inviting Maji to take a seat, the attendant said, "When I was young, I had the most diplomatic missions on behalf of the king, but I never had the opportunity to go to China. Now, at the age of over 120, being able to meet with distinguished individuals from the central kingdom, I must report this to the sovereign. However, I have already retired and have not set foot in the court for over 10 years. Tomorrow morning, I will personally make a special trip on your behalf." After the attendant finished speaking, he instructed his family to arrange a banquet and warmly entertained Maji according to the rules of propriety. After several rounds of drinking, the attendant called over 10 or more beautiful women who resembled demons, and they took turns singing and dancing in front of the hall. The female performers wore white silk wrapped around their heads and red dance costumes that trailed on the floor. Maji could only sense the peculiar tones and disorderly rhythms, unable to understand the lyrics. The attendant seemed quite satisfied, simultaneously enjoying the performance while asking, "Does China have such singing and dancing?" Maji replied, "Yes." The attendant asked him to imitate a few phrases, so Maji tapped on the table, cleared his throat, and sang a song. The attendant exclaimed in delight, "Your singing is like a phoenix's cry and a dragon's roar. I have never heard anything like it before. Truly marvelous." The next day, the attendant went to the palace to meet the king and strongly recommended Maji, praising him for his talent in singing and dancing. Upon hearing this, the king became eager to meet this extraordinary guest from overseas. As the king was about to issue a decree, several ministers advised, "Maji has an ugly and unattractive appearance. Your Majesty, if you were to see him, it might shock your sacred personage, which would be a serious matter." The king reluctantly gave up the idea. The attendant returned home and told Maji about it, expressing his deep regret. He admitted his inability to help but still allowed Maji to stay in his house. One day, while drinking with his host, Maji, under the influence of alcohol, smeared soot on his face and transformed himself into Zhang Fei, a character from the stage. He brandished a sword and began to dance. The attendant found Maji to be very charming and said to him, "Please present yourself in this appearance when meeting the Prime Minister. You will certainly be appreciated, and it will be easier to obtain high-ranking positions and abundant rewards." Maji laughed and said, "Dressing up for fun is acceptable. But if I were to change my appearance to seek official positions and pursue honors, it would be absolutely unacceptable." After the attendant persuaded him repeatedly, Maji finally agreed to give it a try. On the second day, the Prime Minister hosted a grand banquet and invited the influential and powerful figures from the court to attend. When the guests arrived, the Prime Minister called for Maji, who was disguised as Zhang Fei, to come out and meet the guests. The guests were astonished when they saw Maji and exclaimed, "How strange! He used to be so ugly, but today he looks so handsome." They then drank and talked with Maji, enjoying themselves greatly. During the banquet, Maji sang a song called the Yang Tune, and the guests were captivated by his performance, praising him wholeheartedly. The next day at the morning court session, the officials recommended Maji to the king one after another. The king was overjoyed and summoned Maji with great honor. He asked Maji about the ways of maintaining public security in China, and Maji eloquently and tactfully explained. The king was amazed and greatly appreciated his words. The king hosted a banquet in the palace to entertain Maji. When everyone was slightly intoxicated, the king asked, "I heard that you are skilled at singing beautiful songs. Could you please perform for me?" Maji immediately wrapped a white brocade around his head and started dancing while singing a captivating melody. The king was delighted and, on that very day, appointed Maji as a high-ranking official of the Rakshasa kingdom. The king showered Maji with favor and frequently arranged private banquets for him. However, as time went on, the officials became aware that his true appearance was a disguise and began to treat him coldly and keep their distance. Maji noticed the whispered conversations and the growing estrangement from others. Feeling isolated and uneasy, he submitted a memorial to resign from his official position, but the king did not agree. Maji then requested a leave for rest, and the king granted him a 3-month vacation. Maji boarded a carriage from the post station, taking the golden treasures with him, and returned to his hometown, where he was warmly welcomed by the villagers. Maji distributed the gold and silver riches to those poor people with whom he had previously interacted. The people rejoiced and shouted, "We, humble folks, are blessed to receive such kindness from the high-ranking official. Tomorrow, we shall go to the seaport to purchase precious gifts to show our gratitude, my lord." The village people informed the traveler, Maji, that the location of Hai Shur, or the sea market, is in the middle of the sea and is extremely prosperous. They describe how the four seas merfolk bring precious treasures to sell in the market. Many divine beings also visit the sea market for leisure. The village people mentioned that the market is surrounded by colorful clouds and turbulent waves. It's a place that even the wealthy and privileged individuals hesitate to visit and often seek the villagers' assistance in purchasing rare treasures. The date of the sea market is approaching soon. Curious about how they know the date of the sea market, Maji asks the villagers. They explain that whenever they see red-colored birds flying to and from the sea, it indicates that the sea market will commence in 7 days. Maji decides to join the villagers on their journey to the sea market for sightseeing. He asks them when they plan to depart. The villagers advise him against taking the risk, but Maji responds confidently, stating that he is already accustomed to traveling across the seas and is not afraid of any storms. Shortly after, someone delivers money to the villagers, entrusting them to make purchases on their behalf at the sea market. Maji joins them, and together they load the ship with gold, silver, and valuable goods. The ship they board has a flat bottom and high railings, capable of accommodating dozens of people. After Maji and the villagers board, 10 of them row the oars, propelling the ship forward, slicing through the waves with great speed. After 3 days of sailing, they spot the undulating clouds and waters in the distance, with towering buildings and overlapping pavilions. Merchant ships fill the waterways like swarming ants. As the ship approaches the city, they see the Chiao Tower soaring into the sky, and the bricks on the city walls appear as long as human bodies. The villagers secure the ship and proceed to go ashore for shopping. The market showcases a display of rare and exotic treasures, shining brightly, most of which have never been seen in the mortal world. At that moment, a young man on a tall, majestic horse rides by. People on the street quickly make way for him, exclaiming, "It's the East Ocean's third prince." The prince notices Maji and scans him, stating, "Isn't this a foreigner?" Soon after, someone approaches Maji, inquiring about his name and place of origin. Maji bows and introduces himself, sharing his name and hometown. The prince becomes delighted and says, "I'm honored by your visit to our city. It seems we have quite a connection." After Prince Tai finished speaking, he bestowed a fine horse upon Maji and invited him to visit the Dragon Palace. Maji and the prince rode side by side out of the West City Gate. Just as they reached the seaside, Maji's horse suddenly neighed and leaped into the water. He was greatly shocked and looked closely, only to see the sea parting, with the water on both sides standing upright like walls. After walking a little further, they came across a palace. Its beams were made of tortoise shells and its roof tiles were like fish scales. The walls were crystalline and transparent, shining brightly, reflecting even the shadows of people clearly. They dismounted at the entrance of the palace, and the prince bowed and paid his respects before leading Maji inside. Sitting in the palace was the Dragon King. The prince announced, "While strolling in the marketplace, I encountered a talented individual from China and have brought him to meet the great king." Maji hastened forward and bowed. The Dragon King said, "Since you are a literary scholar, I believe you can write extraordinary works like Chu Yuan and Song Yu. I have a request for you to use your great talent and write a magnificent essay depicting the splendor of the seaside. Please do not decline." Maji bowed once again to accept the task. The Dragon King then ordered someone to bring a crystal inkstone, a dragon whisker pen, clean and smooth paper, and fragrant ink. Maji received the pen, ink, paper, and inkstone with joy. His thoughts flowed like a spring, and within a moment, he wrote 1,000 words, presenting the essay to the Dragon King. The Dragon King recited it once, filled with delight, and exclaimed, "Your talent is so magnificent, bringing glory to my humble water kingdom." After speaking, he instructed the dragon offspring and grandchildren to arrange a splendid banquet at the Palace of Gathering Splendor to entertain Maji. After 3 rounds of wine, the Dragon King raised his cup and said to Maji, "I have a beloved daughter who is still unmarried, and I would like to betroth her to you. What is your opinion?" Overwhelmed with gratitude, Maji accepted with repeated words of agreement. The Dragon King turned to those around him and exchanged a few words. Soon, several palace maidens supported the princess as she came out, adorned in pearls and jewels, making tinkling sounds with each step. Then the music played loudly, and the wedding ceremony took place at the Palace of Gathering Splendor. When the couple bowed to each other, Maji stole a glance at the princess and saw that she was as beautiful as a celestial being, exceptionally stunning. The princess completed the ritual and was assisted back by palace maids. Shortly after, 2 servant girls carrying colorful lanterns led the way as Maji entered a palace courtyard, where the princess, adorned in heavy makeup, was waiting respectfully. The furnishings in the new bedroom were extremely luxurious. The coral bed was adorned with various exquisite treasures. The tassels outside the canopy were decorated with large pearls. The bedding on the bed was fragrant and soft, creating a delightful atmosphere. At dawn, a large group of maidens and servant girls came to attend to the newlyweds. After getting dressed and cleaned up, Maji hurriedly went to pay respects to the Dragon King. The Dragon King was overjoyed and immediately appointed him as the commander of the Imperial Guards, while also sending a copy of Maji's writing to the other Sea Dragon Kings, announcing that he had taken Maji as his son-in-law. Upon receiving the good news, each of the Sea Dragon Kings sent representatives to celebrate and also send invitations, inviting Maji to attend banquets. On that day, Maji wore exquisite clothing and rode a green dragon. He was surrounded by dozens of mounted warriors with tall horses, carrying bows and arrows. They shouted and left the palace. The accompanying band played wonderful music from their horses and carriages. Maji traveled to the palaces of the various Sea Dragon Kings for 3 days, visiting all the dragon palaces before returning to the palace where he and the princess resided. Inside the princess's palace, there was a jade tree, about the size of an embrace. The trunk was crystal clear, like white glass, and the core of the tree was a pale yellow. The branches were slightly thinner than an arm, and the leaves were like jade, spreading a dense shade. Maji and the princess often sang and recited poetry under the tree's shade. The tree bloomed with flowers resembling radishes, and each time a petal fell to the ground, it made a tinkling sound. When picked up, the petals looked like carved red agate, smooth and lovely. There were also strange birds that frequently flew into the palace and chirped. These birds had golden green feathers, and their tails were longer than their bodies. Their cries were mournful and poignant, touching people's hearts. Maji longs for his homeland whenever he hears bird songs. He says to the princess, "It has been 3 years since I left my hometown, and I haven't been able to see my parents for a long time. Whenever I think about it, my heart aches, and tears flow uncontrollably. Can you accompany me back to our homeland?" The princess replies, "The immortal realm and the mortal world are not connected. I cannot go with you. I also can't rob you and your parents of their joy for the sake of our love. At this point, we cannot have the best of both worlds. Please allow me to think of a solution." Maji couldn't help but shed tears. The next day, Maji returns from outside, and the Dragon King says to him, "I heard that you miss your homeland. How about leaving tomorrow?" Maji expresses his gratitude and says, "I am alone, living in a foreign land. I am grateful for the king's favor and kindness. Please allow me to return temporarily to visit my parents, and we can reunite in the future. That evening, the princess holds a farewell banquet. Maji and she agree on a date to reunite. The princess says, "Our fate has come to an end." Upon hearing this, Maji's tears flow uncontrollably. The princess says, "You should return and take care of your parents. It is your filial duty. Life is fleeting, and 100 years pass like a day. From now on, I will uphold my fidelity to you, and you will uphold your righteousness to me. Even though we will be in different places, our hearts will be connected as husband and wife. There's no need to be together day and night. If you decide to remarry, your marriage will not be blissful. If your family needs care, you can take a concubine." After a moment of hesitation, the princess continues, "There is one more thing to tell you. It seems that I am already pregnant. Whether it's a boy or a girl, please choose a name for the child." Maji happily responds, "If it's a girl, let's name her Long Gong. If it's a boy, let's name him Fu Hai." The princess asks Maji to give her something as a token. Maji presents her with a pair of red jade lotus flowers he obtained in the Rakshasa kingdom. The princess accepts them and says, "On April 8th, 3 years from now, sail to the South Sea Island, and I will return the child to you." The princess gives Maji a bag made of fish skin, filled with jewels, and says, "Please treasure these. They will last for generations." As the sky brightens, the Dragon King hosts a farewell feast for Maji and presents him with abundant treasures. Maji bids farewell to the Dragon King, mounts his spirited horse, and leaves the Dragon Palace. The princess rides a white sheep-drawn carriage to accompany him to the seashore. Maji dismounts upon reaching the shore, and the princess says to him, "Take care of yourself." Then, she returns to the palace in the carriage. Maji stood on the coast, watching the princess walk away until the sea water merged again and disappeared from sight. Only then did he start walking towards his hometown. Since Maji went missing at sea that year, his family believe he was dead. Now that they see him, they are all surprised. Fortunately, his parents are alive, but his wife has remarried, which surprises him. He remembered the princess calling him upholding righteousness, and realized that the princess had known in advance that his wife had remarried. His father wanted to remarry him, but Maji remembered the princess's instructions and didn't agree. Instead, he agreed to take a maid as a concubine. Time flies, and in the blink of an eye, it is April 8th, 3 years later. Early in the morning, Maji rowed a small boat to the shore of the South Sea Island and indeed saw 2 children sitting on the water's surface, splashing and laughing, neither sinking nor moving. Maji approached the children and reached out, and one of the children grabbed his arm and leaped into his embrace. The other child, however, cried inconsolably, seemingly blaming Maji for not holding him. Maji reached out and picked him up too. Maji carefully looked at the 2 children, one boy and one girl, with handsome faces. Their flower hats were adorned with beads and jade, and the pair of red jade lotus flowers were also attached to them. There was a small pocket sewn on the children's backs, and when opened, it contained a letter from the princess. The letter read, "Are your parents-in-law still alive? It has been 3 years since we parted. The mortal world and the immortal realm forever keep us apart, the rippling waters making it difficult for us to communicate. I think of you day and night, so much that I often dream. But when I think about how the moon waxes and wanes, and how humans experience joys and sorrows and separations and reunions, even Chang'e, who runs towards the moon, remains lonely in her moon palace. And the weaver girl, who weaves with her shuttle, also has to be lonely on one side of the Milky Way. What kind of person am I? How can I demand to be with my husband forever? Whenever I think of this, I can't help but laugh through my tears. 2 months after we parted, I unexpectedly gave birth to twins. They can already speak and laugh. And they can find dates and grab pears. They can live without breastfeeding. Now I am sending them back to you. I heard that you have been faithful to our promise and refrained from remarrying, and I am deeply gratified. In this lifetime, I will never remarry either. My cosmetic box no longer holds scented lip balm, and when I dress up in front of the mirror, I no longer apply makeup. You are like a man on a distant expedition, and I am like a woman who patiently waits at home. Even if we are not together, how can we say that we are not husband and wife? When we lay my mother-in-law to rest a year from now, I will fulfill my duties as a daughter-in-law. From now on, as long as Long Gong grows up without calamity, there will be a chance for me to meet her. Fu Hai will have eternal life and may be able to freely travel between the fairyland and the mortal world. There are many things I want to say, but I can only stop writing here. Please take care of yourself. Ma Ji held the letter and read it repeatedly, wiping away his tears. The two children hugged his neck and shouted, "Let's go back." Ma Ji felt even more sorrowful and caressed the children, saying, "My children, do you know where home is?" The two children cried and clamored to go home, but the vast sea stretched out endlessly, with no trace of the princess in sight amidst the boundless water and sky. How could they find the way to the dragon palace amid the mist and waves? Helpless, he held the children in his arms and rowed the small boat back home, filled with sorrow and regret. From the princess's letter, Ma Ji learned that his mother's life was not long. He prepared a coffin, built a tomb, and planted more than 100 pine and cypress trees in front of it. 1 year later, his mother indeed passed away. On this day, as he carried his mother's coffin to the burial site, he saw a woman dressed in mourning clothes and mourning attire approaching the grave. People looked at her in astonishment. Suddenly, a strong wind rose, accompanied by lightning and thunder, and pouring rain. In the blink of an eye, the woman disappeared. Most of the newly planted pine and cypress trees in front of the tomb had withered, but after being soaked by this heavy rain, they unexpectedly revived. As his son Fu Hai grew up, he often missed his mother and would jump into the sea, only returning after a few days. His daughter Long Gong, being a girl, couldn't enter the sea and would often cry behind closed doors. One day, while Long Gong was crying, suddenly the sky darkened, and the princess entered and said, "My son will create his own family. Why are you crying incessantly?" After speaking, she gave her an 8-foot-tall coral tree, a packet of dragon brain incense, 100 pearls, and a pair of gold boxes inlaid with precious treasured jewels as dowry. When Ma Ji heard that the princess had arrived, he rushed over and held her hand, bursting into tears. In an instant, a thunderous roar sounded, almost shattering the house. Ma Ji regained his senses and looked, only to find that the princess had already disappeared without a trace.